and welcome to this Year 9 lesson on the golden years of the Weimar Republic. And there's a question mark there because in today's lesson we will be assessing the extent to which there was, in fact, a period of golden years for the Weimar Republic in the period 1924 to 1928. You will need for this lesson the lesson notes template, which you will find in all the usual places: Teams, class charts, or it should have been emailed to you. Failing all that, you will find a link to it in the description at the bottom of this video, and you can get it from there. So, without further ado, let's make a start. Okay, so the first task, which is on page 2 of your lesson note template, is a smart task, is a recall task. We need to consider once again the many problems of the Weimar Republic 1918 to 23 before we can start to decide whether things got better in the period 1924 to 28. So what I would like you to do, and you're going to pause this in a moment in order to do it, try and work from memory first of all. Maybe try and categorize the problems as political problems or social problems or economic problems. Maybe that will help you to remember them a little more clearly. In a moment, pause this, spend 5 minutes or so trying to write down from memory all the problems that the Weimar Republic had in the period 1918 to 23. Right, welcome back. You should have been able to write down quite a number of problems. You will find, unless you've been a bit of a cheat and you've looked at this before, you will find on page 3 you have a lot of information about the problems that the Weimar Republic faced in the period 1918 to 23. You can use this to check your own notes from memory. So we've got things like the problems of the First World War, we've got the problems associated with the Treaty of Versailles there, we've got the threats, the political threats to the Republic from the Spartacists on the left of the political spectrum, and from the Cap Putsch on the right of the political spectrum, and then we've got the 1923 crises that you've been working on for the last 3 lessons or so, hyperinflation and the Munich Putsch. Okay, so those are the key problems, the problems associated with the war and the Treaty of Versailles, which left a problematic legacy for the Weimar Republic, and then the threats to the Republic that came from the political sphere: Spartacist, Cap Putsch, Munich Putsch, and the threats from the economic problems that the Weimar Republic had. The most extreme of these being the hyperinflation crisis of 1923. You will also see on this page, on this information, that there is something about the recovery of the Weimar Republic from 1924 to 1928. And it's that recovery that we are going to move on to in a moment. So maybe spend some time adding anything to your map from memory that you didn't get straight away. Add that in from these notes here. And then what we're going to do is have a look at a little film clip, an overview of the improvements in the Weimar Republic in the period 1924 to 1928. So if you're going to add some things to your notes, then do that now. If you got most of those things and you don't need anything to add to your notes, then you don't need to pause now, and you can move straight into the video clip about the recovery of the Weimar Republic in 1924 to 28, and that's going to give you an overview for the rest of this lesson. So that video clip is coming up now.
The period 1924 to 1928 can be seen as the golden years of the Weimar Republic. Firstly, the hyperinflation crisis was solved with the scrapping of the old currency and the release of a new. It was Gustav Stresemann, who was Chancellor for 9 months in 1923, who was the architect of this plan. Stresemann was then Foreign Minister for the rest of this period. It can be seen as golden because the German economy began to improve. Industrial production increased, the political situation began to settle down, with parties supportive of democracy in the ascendancy. A lot of this improvement was down to the Dawes Act of 1924. This saw a flood of American investment into the German economy. Stresemann, as foreign minister during this time, was key in rebuilding the relationship with the rest of Europe. He agreed settled borders with the French and other allies of the First World War. In 1926, Germany was able to join the League of Nations, the organisation that they had been banned from its inception. Stresemann also renegotiated the reparation payments that Germany had to pay as part of the Treaty of Versailles. As well as this period being golden because of political and economic changes and greater stability, there was also greater cultural experimentation. Berlin became the centre of this explosion of new culture, music, and the liberal arts. Women were more liberated as 1920s feminism impacted on the Weimar Republic. Although many people enjoyed this greater cultural freedom of expression, there were also critics who saw this as a diversion, as a break away from traditional German values. The Nazis in particular were very critical of this greater cultural experimentation.
Okay, so that was a bit of an overview of the golden years, in inverted commas, of the Weimar Republic. Here we move on to task 2 and look at solving the hyperinflation crisis. So we can see that Stresemann became Chancellor in August of 1923, and he called off passive resistance because it was bankrupt in Germany. It took courage to do this. We can see that Stresemann's strategy was to work on economic and foreign policy. So that was what he wanted to do. He wanted to make the political situation in Germany more stable by improving the economy and improving relations with other countries. So what did he do? He asked the government to scrap the old worthless money and introduced a new temporary currency called the Rentenmark. And he strictly limited the amount of this currency in circulation. The value of German money was stabilized, and in the next year, a new permanent currency, the Reichsmark, was brought in. Here we can see that what they also did to keep the support of the army and to keep some of the more right of the political spectrum on their side, they got rid of some of the state governments in Saxony and Thuringia, which were left-wing, and that's what helped them also to make sure that the Nazis did not get support in Munich. And the possibly most important thing that he did was to agree the Dawes Plan, which saw America give Germany a huge sum of money to invest in its economy. Okay, so what you're going to do, I've given you a brief overview of this information. What you're going to do now is read through it in more detail, and then you'll find that task 2 on page 5 asks you to explain what steps were taken to solve the hyperinflation crisis and improve the German economy. So you just need to bullet point some of the things that Stresemann and the German government did to improve the economic situation and to solve that hyperinflation crisis. So pause this and do that now. Okay, welcome back. So we said that one of the things that Stresemann did, and one of the things that kick-started this improvement in the Weimar Republic, was to solve the hyperinflation crisis. Now, what he also tried to do, because it was going to help Germany economically, and it was going to make her more politically stable at home, was to improve the foreign relations of Germany with the other countries in Europe, especially. And you can see on page 6 of your lesson notes booklet that there is information about this, about the work he did in improving foreign relations. And it says at the bottom, can you give 3 things that Stresemann did to improve Germany's relationship with other countries in Europe? So I want you to very briefly read this information and pick out 3 things that he did to improve the relationship with other countries in Europe. So pause this and have a go at that, and we'll come back in a little bit. Okay, welcome back. So here are the things that I would pick out as being really important. I would say a really important thing is getting Germany to be able to join the League of Nations in 1926. The League of Nations was set up after the First World War to try and keep peace in the world, but Germany was not allowed to join. So that was quite a big slight against Germany after the war that they weren't allowed to join this international organization, and it was important that they were able to do so in 1926. Another really important thing was to persuade the French to come out of the Ruhr. Now, it took until 1924-25, and it wasn't as fast as certainly Hitler, the Nazis, and other right wing groups wanted, but he did actually enable the French forces to be withdrawn from the Ruhr. And the Locarno Pact that was passed in 1925, this was really important because this was a series of treaties with Britain, France, Belgium, and Italy, and it reassured France about its borders and Germany about further French invasions, and it just basically meant that all these different countries agreed to live peacefully alongside each other. And as part of negotiations later on for the Young Plan, which renegotiated the reparation payments, this also helped to reduce the amount of tension with France and the amount of troops that France might station in Germany in the future. So all of this and pressing for disarmament, all of this was really important. Stresemann did to improve the conditions and the attitude between the foreign countries in Europe and Germany. Okay, moving on from what Stresemann's policies were, if we look on page 7, we can see 2 different pieces of information. One on the left-hand side is from a textbook, talks about the impact of Stresemann's foreign policy on domestic politics in Germany, and the other one on the right was a cartoon from the time of 1929 urging people not to vote for the Young Plan. Remember, the Young Plan was Stresemann's policy that would renegotiate some of the reparation payments with the French. I want you to have a look at these and think about what different views about the success of Stresemann's policies are offered in this information. So pause this now, have a look, and then we'll come back. Right, so the main difference that you should have picked out here is that the information on the left is quite positive about the impact of Stresemann's policies on the domestic politics of Germany. We can see in that table on the left-hand side, what that is showing us is that moderate parties who had faith in the Weimar Republic, who supported democracy, they grew in the period 1924 to 1928, and his renegotiation and changes to the Versailles Treaty meant that things were more stable and that generally there was growing confidence in the Weimar Republic. On the right-hand side, that cartoon gives a very different view. The caption reads, "You must slave into the third generation." It's a very negative interpretation of what Stresemann achieved in the Young Plan. And so we see that, yes, in many respects, what Stresemann did and the impact that he had with his foreign policy was positive. However, there were people in Germany, especially on the right of the political spectrum, who were not happy with any renegotiation of the Treaty of Versailles. They just wanted a termination of the Treaty of Versailles. They wanted the Treaty of Versailles to be ended and for Germany to be free to follow her own path and not have to keep paying money back to the Allies and not have to have the restrictions that were in place in the Treaty of Versailles. So it shows us that there was a divide, that Stresemann wasn't universally popular, that there were people who criticised what he was doing, and not everybody in mid 1920s Weimar Republic thought that things were progressing in the right direction. Okay, so we can move now to task 4. And I alluded to there the fact that there is some difference of opinion about how much the Weimar Republic improved. Certainly at the time, there was a difference in political opinion about whether or not what Stresemann was doing was right. There were many people that criticised it, as well as many people who think it was a good idea. So you got a question here: how much of an improvement was there in the years 1924 to 28? You're going to read through the information and consider which points suggest that the Weimar Republic improved a lot and which suggest it did not. You've got a lot of information here, a lot of bullet points there. You've got some information on the next page about standard of living, and then you've got a table here on page 11 which talks about things were improving a lot or there were still problems. You're going to sort through that information and you're going to produce a table. Things were improving a lot, there were still problems. You don't have to use this particular table here. You don't have to be typing into this. You don't have to be writing into it if you can't print it out. You could do this on a separate piece of paper yourself, just your own little table, and you could write in your notes of things that were improving and problems that still existed. So pause this and have a go at doing that now. Okay, so you should have a decent idea now of the ways in which it could be seen that the Weimar Republic's improving, but also the ways in which it could be seen to be not improving. I think the best way to think about this is to think about that on the surface. So if you were thinking about your table here, on the surface things were improving a lot. There's better political stability, better economic conditions. Generally, things were not as tumultuous and difficult as they had been in the period 1918 to 23. However, there were still economic problems, underlying unemployment issues. There were still political parties that were very opposed to the Weimar Republic and its government, and a lot of the prosperity of the 1920s was built on the loans that were taken from the United States under the Dawes Act, and obviously these were not going to be these were not the most stable foundations to build your economy on, as we see later on when the Wall Street crash rather demolishes those foundations and you have to pay your loan back. What we see here in task 5 is a little question that asks you to infer what we can see about changes in German society in the mid 1920s. If you did GCSE Ready Project A earlier on, then you'll have a good idea about the changing position of women a little bit. So what I want you to do is just to pause, have a go at inferring from this image what changes were taking place in German society in the mid 1920s. Okay, so I would say that one of the main things we can infer from this about the changes is the greater equality and the greater social mixing of men and women. So we see here the certainly in the central pane of this image, we see men and women dancing together. We see men and women interacting with one another in a social space in a way that they might not have done previously. We also see representations of, in the representation of the soldier and of the women on the left hand pane, we see a sense in which society might be changing faster, or it might be changing in a way that's negative given the problems that still exist as a result of the First World War. You've got obviously a crippled veteran of the war there. So the main issue, the main thing to infer here is that there is greater social mixing of men and women in social spaces, and maybe greater equality between men and women in that particular respect. And we see women drinking and smoking and enjoying themselves, and it suggests a change in women's position. So, further down in task 5, here is some more information about the changing position for women in the Weimar Republic, women at work, women at leisure. And the task is to answer this question: were the changes in society a positive or negative thing for the Weimar Republic? So I think what you need to consider is that obviously in some ways this is a very positive thing for women, that they are getting some greater freedom, they're able to vote more, they're able to go out to work more, their leisure time is changing. However, as it shows you in the section that talks about society being divided, there is also something of a reaction against this among many factions of society who don't like this change. And so, yes, on the one hand, if you're answering this question, on the one hand, there were changes that were positive and things were moving forward for the Weimar Republic, and society was becoming maybe more equal. But on the other side, there are people who didn't like that, which gave them a reason to be negative towards the Weimar Republic and gave them a reason to dislike the Weimar Republic, which is obviously going to have negative consequences for the future of the Republic. So that's the sort of answer that you need to sketch out. That on the one hand, yes, they were positive, but on the other hand, there were some difficulties, and you can get the specifics of how to do that from the information on page 12 of your, sorry, page 13 of your booklet, and then have a go at answering the question on page 14. Okay, that brings us to the end of this Year 9 lesson on the golden years of the Weimar Republic, question mark. Hopefully you should get a sense of the positive improvements for the Weimar Republic in this period, but also some of the underlying problems that existed. And it's some of these underlying problems that continue to exist, and the role of the Nazi Party and what they were up to in the mid 1920s, that we will pick up in next lesson. So until then, take care, stay safe, goodbye.